to our today's session of the Monday research calls. And we are very, very fortunate today to have Prof himself giving us this very important lecture on formulating research aims and research objectives. I think without further ado, I will hand the floor over to Prof. Prof, welcome and thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Peter. Sorry for joining a little bit late. It's really my pleasure to be able to give this talk on formulating research aims and objectives. And of course, this is in line with the previous talk that you gave last week, which is all about problem statement. That is being able to really write a concise statement that describes the problem issue that our research is going to address. So there are, of course, a number of steps. The first thing is we have to know the context within which we are acting. Then we have to write a good research question, just as the lecture was given to you last week. What do we still have to know? That's where your research question fit in. And of course, we have to show the reference problem. That is why do we need to know more about this? What is then, and so what? We are going to conduct this research and then what? And of course, to conduct the research, we need to set research objectives. That is, what will we do to find more about this information? So today's topic is going to focus on research objectives and aims. So this is the outline I will propose to you. We will start by looking at research aims, then research objectives, templates. Then we look at the specific objectives and we understand the SMART criteria before connecting the dots. So at the end of this lecture, you will be able to understand the research aims. You will also be able to understand the link between research question and research objectives, which means you should be able to revisit the types of research question. That's just some light on last week talk. Then to use the standard format for different research question time and to formulate specific research objectives and check that each of these objectives fulfill the SMART criteria. So you may remember this slide very well, which was shown last week by Peter on the PICO framework of writing a research question. You have the question type, you have the focus, and then you have the PICO component. So of course, in terms of type of research question, you can have a descriptive, an etiology or causal, a diagnostic, a prognostic, an intervention, which most of the time can compare pharmaceutical, but it can also be just comparing different lifestyle in regards of one particular condition. It can also be just comparing behavior. It's still an intervention. And then we have qualitative, because all of what we said previously are quantitative. So, but we can organize all these type of research questions in three main groups. Those that are descriptive, those that are comparative, that means we are comparing, and those that are correlational, we are trying to find a relationship between two or more variables. What do we mean by research aim? The aim is actually the direction of your study. So it is a long-term goal. It is a goal that will be achieved not only through your research, but several other questions might be answered to really reach the goal. As you can see this young man here, maybe let's assume his goal is to reach here, and that he has to construct some buildings. He might need to construct some building along the road before reaching here. So your research question might just be constructing one of the building, but it actually contributes in really achieving this goal. So look at the research aim like a long-term goal, and look at the research objectives as steps towards achieving that aim. The aim is still there, but the person has to achieve a number of steps before really reaching the goal. And we have the general objective, but at times we will be more focused, and then we define the specific objectives, especially for those who will be writing their dissertation. So what is the general format for research objectives? So in general, there are three things you have to keep in mind. The first thing is your research question must be well written, because that's from where you write the objectives. And I'm sure you remember some of the words that are very common when we are writing a research question. What, why, how. And sometimes we also ask like when, where, who. Now you also have a number of words, especially action verbs, that you have to familiarize with when you are writing your research objectives. So the action verbs are verbs like examine, investigate, explore, discover, describe, compare, understand. So writing our research objectives, we will always have two and then these action verbs. Then what will come next will be the name of our variable of interest. And then we will have the context. What are we interested in? In which context? So for descriptive research question, remember descriptive research question most of the time is about what? Then we have the name of the variable or concept, and then we have the specific context, and of course, a question mark. The objective will simply be to describe. In the descriptive research question we are describing, we can document, we can identify, we can profile. Then name of the variable or concept, and then the context. Actually, when it comes to research objectives, you don't really need to be too creative. You have to ensure that you know your action verbs. Your research question is very well written in such a way that you identify your variable of interest, the context is defined, and then you have your research questions. You have your research objectives well written. Now, what if it comes to a comparative research question? Comparative research question is usually something like this. What differences, for example, exist in this variable versus this other variable, or across groups, or in time? A time is before and after. We can be investigating something that is going to change with time. Maybe, let's say, someone is taking a medication, and we want to see whether that medication will have an influence on one particular variable. Let's say, for example, blood pressure. Is this medication associated with a drop in the blood pressure? So it can be before and after. It can be differences in locations or it can also be differences in policies. Is this policy versus the other policy going to make a difference? The context, of course, has to be acknowledged, and then the question. Now, how will you write the comparative research objectives? The first thing is understand the question very well. Then the objective will be written from there. To compare, to, and then comparative action verb. There are a number of verbs that are comparative action. Assess, examine, explore, compare. Then we will have the differences or the variations or the changes. Then variable plus group, and then the context. That's how your comparative research objectives are going to be written. So you can always understand that it is written from the research question. It's just a way of reformulating the research question in such a way that it tells someone about the way you are going to take in order to answer the research question. What if it is a correlational research question? Like what effect or what impact? What is the impact of? What is the influence of the independent variable on a dependent variable? Then the context, of course, and then the question mark. Correlational research objective will also be written from the correlational research question. It will be, the template will be something like 2 plus your action verb, then effect of the independent variable on the dependent variable, and then the context. To investigate the effect of, to assess the impact of, to examine the influence of. For example, to examine or to assess the impact of gender on the choice of profession. And then the context. You need, of course, to specify the context. If the research question is well written, then the context is always there. So it's just a way of reformulating. But very importantly, the action verbs must be there. Now let's look at, we just look at quantitative. We just look at descriptive, comparative, correlational, all of that are quantitative research questions. But you have, of course, qualitative research. And the difference between quantitative and qualitative research is that, in fact, basic differences is that quantitative research, usually the research questions are specific. We are interested in looking at the relationship between variables, or we are interested in comparing variables, while in qualitative research question, research question might be more general, less specific. We are really more interested in having a deep understanding of a concept. How do people perceive a certain phenomenon? How do people feel about a concept? How do people describe? So in qualitative research, your question is most of the time, what? Sorry, there is a mistake here. But in qualitative research, most of the time you will be interested in seeking the perceptions or the behavior or the attitude of people towards an independent variable or towards a phenomenon, and is in a specific context. Then qualitative research objectives will be 2 plus action verb plus effect of an independent variable on dependent variable and the context. Let's see, for example, to discover how, or to seek to understand or to explore. And then we will have how, or the role of, or why. Then we describe the phenomenon. It could be to seek why people perceive, or how they perceive, or the feeling of people, or how they understand. And then, of course, still the context. You notice on the previous slide, I was a little bit embarrassed when I saw these terms. Because these terms, most of the time, when you say impact, when you refer to impact, you refer to the effect or the influence or the relation or the cause. Most of the time, there is an understanding that this is going to be quantitative. So if you are conducting a qualitative research, I would advise you to avoid these terms. And in general, before you use the term cause, please ensure you really need to use it. Because most of the time, if you are conducting, for example, for students, if you are conducting a cross-sectional, it's actually about associations. It's not really a causal relationship. When you ask a question and you are trying to investigate a cause, at minimum, it's going to be a cohort or a comparative study with longitudinal. So you can, in a cross-sectional approach, answer a question about a cause. You can define a cause-effect relationship through a cross-sectional study. Now, research objectives, as we said, general versus specific. Most of the time, students, when they are writing their dissertation, they will be called upon to write specific objectives. What do we mean by specific objectives? It's actually just a breakdown of your general objectives. I wanted to insist on this because at times, when you look at the research, the specific research objective written by students, it isn't really a breakdown of the general objectives. They tend to write something more general, which can apply on any type of research question. I have, for example, read from time to time specific objective 1 to characterize the population. This is something that applies in almost all the research questions, except it is really a breakdown of your general research question, then it's not going to apply. Specific research objectives have some characteristics. It has to be specific, as said. So we are dealing about one particular problem. It is no more general. It has to be measurable. When we talk of measurable, it means that we are talking about a variable. It must outline a variable. We must, by reading the specific question or reading the specific objective, identify the variable that we are going to measure. What are we measuring here? It has to be achievable. It is not something that cannot be attained. It has to be relevant, of course, in the context, and it has to be limited in time bounded. So let me, for example, share with you this question. What is the role of gender in specialization choices among medical doctors in Cameroon? That's our general research question. So you understand the general objective will be something like to investigate the role of gender in specialization choices among medical doctors in Cameroon. And then you can break down these general objectives into 3 specific objectives. Let's look at the key terms in this general objective. Gender is going to be a key term. This is our action verb here. Gender is going to be a key term here. So we can break this. The role of gender could be the role of male, the role of female, and then in the next step, we compare. So we can start by saying, okay, we will investigate specialization choices among male medical doctors. We will seek to understand that. And then we'll seek to understand among females. And then now we will compare male and females. That makes a breakdown of your general objective. This is another research question which is rather comparative, which can be, for example, is a dual combination of calcium channel blocker plus diuretics more efficacious and more tolerated than ACI plus calcium channel blockers or ACI plus diuretics in lowering blood pressure among hypertensive patients residing in sub-Saharan Africa? You understand the context. You understand the variable here. What are we measuring? We are measuring the changes in blood pressure. We have here 3 groups. We have CCB plus diuretics, CCB plus ACI plus diuretics. So our objective will be to compare these 3 groups in terms of blood pressure changes, but also in terms of tolerance, though the tolerance here hasn't been precise, because tolerance could be clinical or it could also be on biological parameters. But anyway, the key variable here that is most precise is the changes in blood pressure. And the context here is, of course, sub-Saharan Africa. So that's how you have to think when you are writing your research objectives, which is a very important point towards writing a very clear, writing a problem statement in the way that it can be vendable. Then, of course, you have to connect the dots. Last week, we studied a research question. We studied the research objectives. And normally, we have to move to research hypothesis. But I suggested to Peter that we look into this in another session. So we will be looking at it probably next week or week after. So I was at the conclusion that I said we will definitely we have to look at the research objectives as something that derive from research questions. If we formulate our research questions very well, then the formulation of research objective is just a game, as you saw. And we have to ensure once our research objectives are formulated that they meet the SMART criteria. And of course, we have to connect our objectives with the research hypothesis, which will be discussed in another lecture. So I'm also going to share with you, with the permission of Peter, hoping that I still have some time, I'm going to share with you an assignment which I would like you to go through and to deliver it next week. So I would like you to define the research objective in your own words and explain what research objectives are and why they are important in a study. And also identify 5 characteristics or 5 features of a well-formulated research objective. Then I'm sharing with you a question, and I would like you to formulate 3 specific objectives that align with the SMART criteria from this question. So the question is, what is the impact of heart failure on mortality among patients with heart failure in Cameroon? What is the impact of heart rate on mortality among patients with heart failure in Cameroon? And number 4 is about the guidelines. So please don't go above 300 words. Ensure you submit before a week, and please try to stay very concise, to think critically, and to ensure that the objective you will formulate really obey to the SMART criteria. So thank you very much for your attention. And I understand we shall now discuss. We have some few minutes to discuss. Sorry again for the interruption. Thank you, Peter.
Thank you very, very much, Prof, for this wonderful lecture on a topic that is scarcely touched in such detail in most courses that we have in our settings. So we'll now give the opportunity to the participants on the floor to